What sort of a legacy do you believe he has?
I think the big point is that America has never been so divided. I think he unloosed things in American life in all sorts of ways that have led to that great symbol of rioters occupying the Capitol building and trying to overcome the results of an election by violence. That is going to poison, even for a lot of his supporters, like Mitch McConnell, the Trump legacy. It is a very divided country. I can't recall a time when America has been this profoundly divided, and many historians would say not since the Civil War.
What sort of a power vacuum does it leave behind now within the Republican Party?
Well, I think there's going to be a battle between people like Mitch McConnell, who's been quite forthright now, very late in the day, of course, about what he sees as the deficiencies of Trump's one-man Bonapartist leadership, and between the Trump forces, who still command enormous support from ordinary Republican voters. Trump's got the capacity to mobilise voters in primaries. Primaries for the midterm elections in 2 years' time, and the primaries in 2024 that will determine who is the next presidential candidate. That is where Trump's power is, his capacity to mobilise the rank and file of the Republican Party, and it's not going away. And my instincts are that I think the Trump forces, if they properly play their hand, are going to be the dominant element in the Republican Party over the next 4 years.
Is it your expectation that he will run again? Let's say if the trial isn't successful, that he would start campaigning again in 2 years' time?
I think his instincts would tell him that he's got to occupy the vacuum in the Republican Party, otherwise he will lose power. So he's got to keep running those rallies, and if he doesn't stand himself, be prepared to endorse one of his children or a rusted-on supporter like Nikki Haley, for example, right, former governor and diplomat. He won't want to relinquish that power. Every fibre of his being will tell him, keep going forward, keep campaigning. He is a master at running those sorts of rallies and mobilising that Republican base, and he won't want to retreat from that.
What do you think was his greatest achievement? Because many people would believe that pre-pandemic he would have been on his way to a second term. There were tax cuts that led to a roaring economy. There was policies that he put in place that moved towards some kind of peace in the Middle East. So there are some things that he did quite well. What do you think was his best achievement?
I think you've got to say that his entirely unconventional approach to North Korea produced a sense in the North Korean leadership that they should pull back from any further adventurism when it comes to nuclear weapons tests or new capacity rockets. So he could argue that by throwing away the diplomatic textbook and plunging into summit negotiations with the odious leader of North Korea, he produced movement. You could also say that he's got Arab states normalising their relationship with Israel, and he did it by abandoning conventional diplomatic paths. He's changed the ideology of the Republican Party when it comes to going from a free trade position to a protectionist position and adopting an explicitly anti-immigrant position. So whatever you think about those two policies, he has been a political success at changing the policy character of the party that he took over in 2016. Now, these are formidable political achievements, but he would have been, if he provided national leadership on the COVID-19 crisis, and if he'd pursued an impressive national infrastructure program, he would have been a far more formidable leader and one who, even in the pandemic, could have been re-elected.
So what does Joe Biden do with the 74 million people who voted for Donald Trump? Does he heed their voices?
He's got to reach out to them. At the present time, they feel they're losing what they see as the traditional America. They're seeing the eclipse of a white-dominated America, and they see that in Kamala Harris. They see that in the Senate runoff elections in Georgia. A loss of white political power, and that has alarmed people who are unabashed white supremacists. Somehow, Biden has got to find a way of lowering the decibel level in American politics, in bridging some of the divisions with the softly committed Trump base, because he'll never reach the sorts of people, Proud Boys and QAnon extremists who burst their way into the Capitol. I think that's going to be very hard because, again, Trump's biggest legacy is a country more divided, I would argue, than any time since the Civil War of the 1860s.
So where does that leave Australia? We've got the opposition leader, Anthony Albanese, who's making a speech later on, Bob, and he's going to say that our Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, remains afraid of the far-right extremist fringe dwellers who make up the bedrock of his personal support and who he cultivates through the avatars of Trumpists. What do you agree with those comments?
Yeah, I do, absolutely. I think Scott Morrison is being too accommodating of a band of very right-wing figures in his parliamentary party. George Christensen, for example, and Craig Kelly, who've actually endorsed Trump conspiracy theories, saying that the election was stolen. So is Joe Hockey, by the way, vastly to Joe Hockey's discredit. People in Australia who say the election was stolen, there was vote rigging, as those characters have done, are having their words taken back to America and repeated by Trump-supporting conspiracy theorists there. And that's very, very bad for America. So I think Anthony Albanese is on strong grounds when he says Prime Minister Morrison should really disown those extremists in his own ranks. More seriously, I think the point to be made is that our embassy in Washington could have got too close to Trump and paid too little attention to the prospect of the Democrats returning to the White House, as they've done triumphantly, with a big majority in the popular vote and the Electoral College vote.
But naturally, you know, you've got to be close to whatever government is in power.
Yeah, that's undoubtedly true. You work with the government that's there, even if you've got a different political view yourself. So I'm not suggesting it was wrong for us to have a good working relationship and to seize every opportunity to put our case to the White House during the years when Trump was there. But I do think, at the same time as you pursue that strategy, you've got to have lines of communication with the Democrats, and you've got to keep open the possibility that when you overdo the pro-Trump position, there are Democrats looking at you thinking, gee, I thought our Australian mates were a bit more sensitive, a bit more nuanced. Certainly among the Biden team, there is a view that we're a pretty right-wing lot in Australia, especially on climate. And I think there will be polite but firm pressure from the Biden team to have us say we're committed to net zero emissions by 2050 and to drop this idea of having a parliamentary inquiry headed by George Christensen roughing up corporations that adopt climate-friendly policies. And actually, I think Scott Morrison will move on both fronts.